SABC News political reporter Samkele Maseko joins us now live from East London. A very good morning to you, Samkele. Thanks indeed for your time. So, huge developments overnight. Let's start there. Mlibo, who was also vying for the chairpersonship, has now joined Babalo Matikizela faction. What does all of this mean?
Essentially, Griselda, Mlibo has joined the Babalo Matikizela faction. He addressed them last night in their caucus meeting. It essentially means that Mlibo will, with whatever he's bringing to the table in terms of voters, will be voting with Babalo Matikizela. That remains to be seen, what numbers he's bringing to the table to Babalo Matikizela's faction, whether it's 100 or 80 or whatever numbers of branch of delegates that he has at this conference. They will now be voting with Babalo Matikizela. Essentially, he was saying that they need to return the ANC back to its former glory days. But let's just listen to what Mlibo had to say when he addressed those supporters of Babalo Matikizela last night when they joined forces.
All right, Samkele, apologies. We'll get that clip for you a bit later on, but we did introduce some of what he said. In fact, in that clip, he did indicate that he wants the ANC to be returned to its former glory, and you could see him standing side by side with Babalo Matikizela. And, you know, in terms of the number of branches that had indeed been supporting Mlibo Koboshiane, that will certainly give an indication. So, Samkele, the conference extended to Monday last night, due to allegations of bogus delegates. What's expected to happen this morning?
Essentially, Griselda, on that issue of bogus delegates, I'm just going to go along with my colleague, Gabi, just to show you that there were large numbers of delegates who were gathered here outside this International Convention Center, essentially because they were cleaning up the credentials of the conference. And this morning, every region had a table which they are going to and presenting their tags as a delegate and identity documentation to show that they are true delegates, to try and iron out the issues of bogus delegates for this specific conference, where it was raised last night that there are too many people inside plenary and there may be bogus delegates inside this specific conference. They then took a decision to adjourn the conference last night in order to reconvene this morning to iron out the issues of credentials. These tables here are essentially being used to iron out the credentials to make sure that there are no bogus delegates, there are no ghosts inside plenary, and that there are warm bodies inside the conference, in the words of Oscar Mabuyane, who is the convener of the province. As you can see, that specific delegate there who comes from the Amatole region, they've just shown their tag as a delegate. They're now getting a wristband to show that they are a legitimate delegate, and they will now essentially move across and go and enter at the main gate that side in order to go up and to be elected as and to be put into the conference as a delegate. The list goes on to the various 8 regions of the province to allow each and every delegate to re-enter, showing their tag, showing their ID, to make sure that they are legitimate delegates to this conference and not bogus or ghost delegates.
Samkele, obviously last night, while we saw Oscar Mabuyane giving his political report, on the other side, there was a court application that subsequently thrown out last night. Does this in any way boost Oscar Mabuyane's prospects?
Essentially, with the court application of Dr. Talbit Rabuswana, it essentially means that if the court had ruled to grant that interdict to make sure that those delegates do not participate in this provincial conference, 100 or so delegates would have been removed from the voters' roll of this specific conference. You remember when essentially this conference started, they did say that the Dr. Khabusana regional delegates will be quarantined on the virtue that there were disputes over these branches and how they ended up parading in their branch general meetings, and they would contaminate the entire voting block of the delegates. They decided to quarantine them, and with this court case going on now, which has concluded yesterday, they essentially now have the green light. They can go ahead, they can participate, and they can fully vote as all other delegates within this specific conference. Some delegates are already making their way inside plenary. As you can see, they are already lined up to enter the International Convention Center after they passed this specific process. Let's just listen to that clip of Mlibo Qoboshiana speaking about the unity of the ANC and him essentially throwing his hat in joining the Babalo Matigizela perspective.
International Congress to be returned back to its members. I want African National Congress to regain its glory.
All right, Samkele, just before we let you go, talk us through what is expected this morning. You've indicated those delegates are now heading in. I hope perhaps there won't be any further delays to this, even though we know now that the conference, of course, will continue into tomorrow.
Essentially what will happen now, Griselda, is that conference, once this issue of credentials, of checking all delegates that are outside, that they're the correct ones, they will then move and go into the conference venue. Credentials by the steering committee with regards to the credentials of the conference will then be presented into plenary, and that is when they will then discuss those particular credentials. But there have been issues raised by some by some regional secretaries like Leolo Ngakula and Terison Tutu, Leolo from the Nelson Mandela Bay region and Terison Tutu rather from the Amatole regional executive, who is the regional secretary. They're saying that the lists that were being used for these delegates, they don't particularly know them and they don't know where they are coming from, and that may be a bone of contention here at this specific conference once they go back into plenary to discuss these specific matters. So that may be a bone of contention on who compiled those lists, where do they come from, why are they now being used? Because they are saying that those lists were not necessarily raised within the secretary's forum for them to be utilized to register these delegates now here in the morning. And that's one of the typical critical issues when it comes to credentials, because for credentials to be nominated, those are some of the issues that they raise, particularly to have those credentials adopted. So once plenary gets into session, the issue of credentials, the issue of lists that were being used to register these delegates and to check them this morning may be another bone of contention, which may further add about another 3 to 2 hours of further deliberations on this matter. As you can see, that their conference fever is in full swing. Some are saying he's coming back. Some are also saying that he will not be come back. There will be change. So these delegates are essentially riled up when it comes to the election of leaders within the province. But interestingly, one important key factor that these delegates are not discussing is the policy proposals. You've got a policy proposals for the oil and gas exploration within the province, which has been raised by the national chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, opening this conference, that these delegates should be discussing these issues. But that is not seemingly coming to the fore. They are not discussing some of the proposals that have come from the Economic Transformation Subcommittee of the African National Congress to further deliberate and to see how they can further grow the economy of the Eastern Cape, which is some of the issues and some of the matters that have particularly been missing within the ANC regional and provincial conferences that have been taking place over the past few hours. Then you've got the issue, particularly with oil and gas, Griselda.
Yeah.
You've got the Central Energy Fund in South Africa, which is specifically now procuring the refinery SABC to make sure that South Africa further explores oil and gas so that it mitigates the escalating fuel prices that you are seeing in the country.
Samkele Maseko, thank you very much indeed. Keeping an eye for us there in East London. Of course, the conference now delayed to Monday. Would only be expecting some of the voting to take place much later on today. And we saw Mlibo Gqoboshiane, who was, of course, in the late hours yesterday, last night, indicating that he is joining that faction of Babalo Matikizela. And we'll certainly bring you the latest. There are lots of analysis on that as well. What does all of this mean? Let's take a look now at this particular story. Mlibo Gqoboshiane says the outcome of the ANC's provincial conference lies in the hands of the voting delegates. That's what he told them yesterday. Gqoboshiane says he wants the African National Congress to go back to its members and regain its glory.
In our last year to make quality of the improvement of the organizational capacity of the province of the Eastern Cape. Everybody, with no exception, must be in this hall on time and never leave this hall without the next instruction. We want African National Congress to be returned back to its members. We want African National Congress to regain its glory. In the next conference, it must never be more than 2 days to constitute a conference. Kodwa mantabana mayibende umsebenzi esikuwo kunzima. Asikagqibi apha phandle basekhona abantu abafuna le nto sikuyo ayonto yamabhongo. This is a serious organization.